In Winchester, welcome to Question Time. On our panel tonight, Suella Braverman, until recently a government minister for Brexit, until she quit over Theresa May's deal. She now makes her views known from the back benches. John Healey, Labour's shadow housing secretary and a former campaigner for disability rights. A journalist who is chief leader writer at The Observer and former senior policy advisor to Ed Miliband, Sonia Sodha. Iain Anderson, executive chairman of the communications agency Cicero Group and an ambassador for the LGBT charity Stonewall. And last but not least, Daily Express columnist and radio host on LBC's weekday breakfast programme, Nick Ferrari. So welcome to our panel, welcome to all of you who've come here tonight, and of course welcome to you at home as well. And as always, you can argue along from home using hashtag BBCQT on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. We are everywhere. So let's have our first question tonight. Alan Hampton.
Will the country stomach a delay to Brexit beyond March the 29th?
Sonia, the question was, will the country stomach a Brexit delay beyond March the 29th?
I think the country will stomach it because I think it needs to happen. If you look at what's going on...
You're not getting a lot of support here from the audience.
I can see a couple of faces, a few hands of support there. So if we look at what's going on in Parliament, we've seen a massive failure of leadership, not just on one side, on both sides. We've got Theresa May's deal, which absolutely does not deliver on what people were promised in the 2016 referendum. On the other side, we've got the fantasy land of Jeremy Corbyn saying, hey, just give the power to me, I'll go to the EU and get a better deal. That's absolutely not going to happen. So you've got a massive failure on both sides. Time is running out. Thank goodness for MPs like Yvette Cooper, Dominic Grieve, the real grown-ups in the room. These MPs, they are the grown-ups in the room. They're doing what's really needed. They know we're in uncharted waters. They know our politics is in crisis. That's why they're trying to get an extension. And if I could just come back to the excellent point that the lady made in the second row, this was a very narrow referendum result. Now, nobody wants there to be another referendum, ideally. The idea of that doesn't exactly make my heart fill with joy. But so much has changed in the last 2.5 years. We've got a deal on the table now. It doesn't deliver what people were promised. The world has changed. We've got an openly hostile president of America who is protectionist. He's not going to give us a free trade deal people talked about in 2016. And Parliament is gridlocked. We have to go back to people. We have to put Theresa May's deal to the people. It is the only democratic thing to do. An important principle of democracy is periodically, when big things change after the passage of time, you go back and you check in with voters. How is that anti-democratic? I just can't see it.
Let me just put some of this to John. So, John, you've got Sonia describing some of your colleagues. You've got Sonia describing some of your colleagues as the grown-ups in the room. I'm not sure what that says, what you're saying about John. How do you respond in Cyprus? Sony's moving its European HQ to Amsterdam. Sonia.
Well, it's not about Brexit. He would say that, wouldn't he? James Dyson is a hypocrite. It's really important...
Fairness, James Dyson is not here to answer for himself, so I think we should be careful what we say about it.
Well, it's really important symbolically where a company places its headquarters. He's certainly not putting his money where its mouth is. And I think whether it's James Dyson, whether it's Nigel Farage, who's made sure 2 of his children have got German passports, whether it's Nigel Lawson, who's applied for French residency, these are the Brexit elite. They know there are going to be consequences, and they've protected themselves against it. They don't care about ordinary voters whose parents have retired to Spain. They don't care about ordinary voters whose kids can't go abroad, who won't be able to go abroad and study at university anymore. These people are hypocrites. They're protecting themselves against the impact of Brexit, and they don't care what impact it's going to have on ordinary voters up and down the country.
Nick, briefly, because I want to get round the audience.
Very briefly, just listen to what Suella said. There are 4,000 people 2 staff have gone. I've never been very good at maths. Hold on, I listened to you. I've never been very good at maths, but that leaves 3,000... Hold on, this is a gentleman. Can we please stop calling this man a hypocrite? This is a man who paid £175 million in tax last year. That builds a lot of hospitals and a lot of schools. And lastly, he sells 4% of his output in the UK. He's actually underscoring what people say about Brexit. The new markets are Singapore. The new markets are Asia, and that's why he's going there.
Nick, you have hit the nail on the head.
Not for the first time.
He paid 175 million quid in taxes.
Gladly. Have you read his article?
He is moving the domicile of his business, and therefore the tax will no longer be available for public services in this country.
Is that definite?
That's his tax.
That has not been established where the company will be paying its taxes.
If you move the headquarters of a company...
You've not held back. Suella.
Well, I disagree with you, madam, with respect, on the point about this being the worst decision that the country made. I think this is one of the best decisions this country will be making for the future generations. But on the voice of business, you're absolutely right that we should be listening to the voice of business. They employ many people, and it's all about livelihoods at the end of the day. But we must always question the voice of business. They're not always speaking.
Do you question Jaguar Land Rover, who are extending their April car production shutdown due to potential Brexit disruption? Ford, they're saying that their internal calculations suggest they'll face a bill of £612 million.
And that's one side of the coin. Let's just say, on Airbus,
well, it's just their business, that's what they're saying.
You're right, and I'll come to it. On Airbus, I was disappointed to learn today that the government had actually asked Airbus to make these comments public. So this kind of conspiracy and complicitness is not healthy. They should be reassuring businesses that it's going to be okay on March 29, not asking them to agitate to put pressure on MPs. Secondly, it's very difficult to see what Airbus's complaints are, because when it comes to potentially tariffs that they're scared of in a no-deal scenario, that doesn't stack up, because on aerospace and aviation parts, they are zero tariffed, even in a no-deal scenario. On safety certification, the EU has made it clear that even in a no-deal scenario, safety certificates will be recognised. And if it's about queues at the border, Dover and today Calais, the lead man at the port of Calais, has made it unequivocally clear that even in a no-deal scenario, no queues will happen. Transports will be allowed to, lorries will be allowed to flow, and actually,
is that a guarantee?
There will be no extra administrative checks at the border.
Is that a guarantee? There will be no.
That is what the leader of the mayor of the Port of Calais has said.
It's the chairman of the Calais.
HMRC, talking about Dover, has said no extra checks will be applied at Dover in a no-deal scenario, and I stand by what he has said, and that's on the record. So I think all this talk about no deal being a catastrophe for business has to be taken with a pinch of salt. There are many, many hundreds and thousands of businesses who are looking forward to Brexit, who are enthusiastic about a no-deal Brexit and the opportunities for control over our rules and open markets for their goods. There are great opportunities to a WTO Brexit. Let's go get them.
You said that James Dyson perhaps shouldn't have moved to Singapore based on the fact that it sends a bad signal to the country. You also stated that Suella was living in Fantasyland with her views on Brexit. Are you perhaps suggesting that James Dyson should have made a business decision based on sentiment and a symbol, or on the symbolisation that his decision would have sent a signal to a country, instead of the financial benefits of moving to a new market in a separate part of the world?
Yeah.
I think it is a good point, but my answer to that would be, I think that when you stand up on a platform and you argue for something like Brexit, you've got to put your money where your mouth is. And when you choose to relocate your headquarters halfway around the world, you're not standing by the arguments that you're making. You're protecting yourself against the negative impacts of something that you've argued for and something that's going to impact ordinary voters up and down the country negatively. So I think that's why I'm saying that James Dyson shouldn't have done what he said. I do want to come back to Suella's point, if I may briefly, about Calais. It's absolute rubbish to say that there aren't going to be extra administrative checks in the event of a no-deal Brexit. The guy who Suella is quoting, he's the chairman chairman of the Calais Port Authority. It's in his interest to say that. He runs that business. He's not the French government. He's not the EU. He's not the WTO, which sets the rules that says there will be border checks if we fall out of the EU, if we crash out. So it's because they set the rules. We'd be trading on WTO rules. Suella has been completely misleading in those comments, and that's the kind of misleading information which I think is so dangerous when it comes to a no-deal Brexit.
John, I've got to let John talk. John, I suspect we've heard from a future head of a FTSE 100 company just there, that young man. But what's your point?
What we heard from Suella is exactly why we're in this mess. This is exactly why Theresa May cannot get a deal that simply relies on Conservative colleagues like Suella Braverman. And this is why we will have no deal. We will risk crashing out with no deal unless we get a deal that reflects the sensible centre. And I tell you, if the government chaos continues, if we're threatened with a crash-out Brexit, if we don't reach this impasse, if people don't have, if her deal goes down again because she looks to people like this for support, then the case for a general election will only grow. They're failing on Brexit because they're divided. Well, I'm sorry, they're failing on Brexit.
You're not getting a terribly favourable response to that, John,
this is a failure not just of Theresa May, but this is a failure of the... Let me just finish this point, Nick, if I may.
Okay, you must begin then, please.
This isn't just Theresa May's failure. You've seen tonight, this is a failure of the Conservative Party in government. All right. It is divided, it is dysfunctional, it is distracted, and that's why the case for a general election, I have to tell you, will only grow.
We are going to drag ourselves away from Brexit, just temporarily, and move on to another subject. So I'd like to come to Stephanie Price, please.
What should be done to protect young people from inappropriate social media content to help reduce levels of suicide and self-harm?
Now, I just want to put this in context for a moment, which, of course, I assume you're referring to, amongst others, to the case of Molly Russell, a tragic case of a young girl who took her own life just at 14, and her father blamed her access to suicide imagery on social media for her death. That's his view, and he says, I have no doubt that Instagram killed my daughter. I have to say, I watched him speak. I don't know about you, it moved me to tears. I have to be honest about that. Sonia, what's your view on this?
I think this is an incredibly important question. So we know young people are spending more and more time on their phones, on social media platforms, and we also know that those social media companies, their whole business model, the way they make money, is by encouraging us to be nastier, more aggressive, more abusive to each other than we would be in real life, and it's got to stop. So I think there are a couple of things we should be doing. First of all, the government should be doing much, much more to clamp down on social media platforms. It's like the smoking industry, which makes money out of social harm. That's what social media companies do, and we've got to clamp down. In France, for example, last September, they've implemented a ban on mobile phones across all schools. I think we should be looking at doing the same here. But it can't just be about protecting our children from social media, because we can't wrap them in cotton wool. They will come into contact with it. So I think we need to think about how we equip them with the skills and the resilience to use social media safely. It's like training wheels on a bicycle. There's a really great website in Ireland called Cyber Smarties. It's a safe training social media platform for primary school children. And what it does is it encourages them to interact positively with each other. So, for example, if they're going to say something negative, it will encourage them to use more positive language. If they're feeling a bit sad, they can click on a button and see lots of positive messages from their friends. Now, that may sound a bit twee, but actually what we've got to do is encourage young people to go against the grain of what social media companies want us to do, which is to be mean to each other online and to be much more supportive and kind towards each other. And I think if we start with young children in primary school, that's something that we can do.
Stephanie, can I just come back to you a moment? What's your view about what should be done?
I think there is a need for greater regulation. I don't think you can simply rely on these companies to self-regulate, because they simply aren't doing enough, particularly looking at some of the things that have been mentioned this week about images which are very distressing being seen by youngsters next to a piece of advertising for something which they would be interested in. The companies clearly are not doing enough themselves.
The young woman in the audience, I'd like to hear from you.
Well, I think it's very easy to say that social media contains a lot of images that are sensitive and they're damaging, and it's true, it's definitely a big problem. But I think another problem we have to address is the availability of mental health services to young people.
Absolutely.
And it's just not there. It's just not there.
John Healey.
One-on-one counselling is just not being provided as it should be.
Under free speech. So
John.
that we have a degree of free speech. At what point does free speech stop covering anything posted online? How nasty can something be, or how hateful can something be said on Twitter?
Suella.
Yes. Well, you ask a very good question. I just want to applaud the people who've talked personally and very movingly about their experiences. It takes a lot of courage to be open about mental health and the effects it has on all of us. In answer to your question, when does it become a crime? Well, you're right, there is a balance to strike between freedom of speech and causing harm to our fellow citizens. And once it tips that balance of inciting hatred, of harassment, of abuse, of unacceptable and intolerable language, then we are getting into the realms of unacceptable and criminal, potentially, language, and therefore we're talking about, violating rules. But more widely on this issue, this is a complex issue. There are many advantages to the explosion of social media and technology. Many of us can book our holidays and buy our food online, but obviously there is a limit to which this needs to go, and tech companies need to start taking some more social responsibility about how they're running their operations.
And can you not make them do that? Is that not the role of government?
And I think the government does have a role, absolutely, in here, providing mental health services, but also in looking at how government can step in and actually prohibit the excessive and unacceptable proliferation of language. And the government is committed to this. To his credit, Matt Hancock, our Health Secretary, has talked very openly about mental health and how we have to try and take more action from a government point of view.
But what are you going to do about the internet? Hang on, Sonia,
Okay.
wait. What are you going to do about the internet companies specifically?
Yeah. Well, there are various avenues that we're going down. We have passed it previously, a data protection bill, which is all about the capture of data. Facebook, we saw last year, was found to be guilty of capturing people's data without their consent. That's one example where they're transgressing rules of acceptable behaviour. And we have to absolutely look at where the government can step in, where laws can be made with enforceable sanctions, so that tech companies, if they don't clamp down on abusive language, on the exploitation of child sexual pornography, which is a big problem online, on other bullying and cyberbullying, then there should be some sanctions where there is a line that has been crossed.
But Suella, I have to pick you up on something here, because I saw you nodding along when Iain was talking about availability of services. And I'm not going to do a nick and let the government off the hook, because there was a big survey of GPs last year, and they were asked about mental health services for young people. And the vast majority of GPs said they were worried about young people coming to harm because there just isn't enough availability when it comes to mental health services. We had GPs reporting delays of up to 18 months. GPs saying children now have to be suicidal before they get access to mental health services. And that comes back to resources and money. So no, Suella, you do not get to sit there and nod along when Iain talks about availability of mental health services. You were part of a government until just a few months ago that has not adequately funded the NHS and has not done enough about mental health. Warm words from Matt Hancock will not do. We need proper mental health support for our children, and that has to come from government funding.
Briefly.
The point here,
it's a hugely important topic, and I'm so glad we've had a chance to discuss it this evening. I've got time just for one more question, so I'm going to go to Michael Mundy. Michael.
At what age should one no longer be allowed to drive?
Now, I'm assuming, Michael, you're asking this question because obviously the Duke of Edinburgh was involved in a collision. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. Sonia, just briefly.
Well, I wonder if everyone should face a retest after a set number of years, because we can all become worse drivers. The thing I will say about older people in cars, though, is that for many of them, a car isn't a lifestyle choice like it is for Prince Philip. It's a lifeline out into the community. My granddad, before he died, he relied on his car. And if we were to introduce tighter controls on older people driving, I think we have to make sure there's a plethora of other services in the community, ways for them to get around, community centres, Meals on Wheels. But we know that in the last decade, a lot of that has been cut back. We've got a massive problem with isolation and loneliness and older people in this country. So I would be very reluctant to do anything that cuts older people off.